Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink, and for today's card I'm using a couple of older sets from Honeybee that were released last year, and I'm using this mermaid image from the Honeybee Swimming By stamp set, and I used my scissors to do a little bit of alterations. I actually didn't cut apart the stamp per se, so much as just cut between her arms and her tail here on the stamp. So I didn't actually cut the stamp like the image itself. I just wanted to be able to kind of move her arms away from the image without having to do a ton of masking to make things a little simpler. I've shown in other videos where I will literally cut stamps apart, but generally with ones like this that are images, I wouldn't touch them, but there was the connecting kind of parts of the polymer there, so I just put a little snip in between there to be able to move her arms around, and it's good to go. It still works the way it was intended. It'll, I can stamp it the way it is. This would work also though if you wanted to stamp her and have her arms like going out and having her hold things, it's just a nice way to alter it. I did this anyway, and then I got redundant and kind of masked off her arms with washi tape and then realized I didn't need to do that. And because all I wanted was her tail, and I wanted to be able to ink up and stamp as much of just her tail as possible. And I have some distress watercolor paper here. This is the pre-cut 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 piece, and I have the smooth side facing up. And I used my anti-static powder tool, and I'm going to use my anti-static powder tool every single time I stamp. And I want to stamp this tail multiple times with VersaMark ink, which is just a clear, sticky, slow-drying ink. And then each time I stamp it with the VersaMark, I coat it with a detail white embossing powder, and then I melt it. And you can't really see as much on camera. In real life, I can see where I've stamped once it's melted because it's glossy and raised. And then I'm just very liberal with the anti-static powder tool because I don't want embossing powder, clinging to everything. And with these, I was originally going to do a bunch of masking too, and then I decided to keep things a little simpler. And I actually liked I didn't mind the actual fins of the tails overlapping. I was totally fine with that. If any parts over the tail, like where the little scales were, overlapped, I just wiped that away with a paintbrush before I melted it. But any other overlapping, I was fine with. I don't know, I just thought it looked kind of cool like that. So I went across this entire card front, stamping those images and heat embossing them, and you can kind of see the reflection there of everything melted. So once they're all stamped and melted, I'm going to color all of these in with Distress Oxide inks. And I'm going in rainbow order because who doesn't love a rainbow of just anything? Doesn't matter what it is. So I just smushed several Distress Oxide inks onto my glass mat here, and then I'm going to paint them with my watercolor brush. So I'm just using my little Tim Holtz detail watercolor brush. And again, I've mentioned this in videos, I'm really liking the look of kind of doing messy watercolor, purposely going outside the lines, and then adding more intense color afterwards. So it just gives it a completely different look. So I wet the area first with the water brush with just water, and then I pick up the color, like the Distress Oxide ink, with the water brush, and every time I'm picking up the color, I actually squeeze the water brush a bit just to get it a little bit watered down. I don't want really intense color with all this color that I'm painting outside the lines, and I let the colors kind of run into each other. And I just go in rainbow order, so red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple, and then I have to add a pink. So I'm using Candied Apple, Carved Pumpkin, Squeezed Lemonade, Lucky Clover, Blueprint Sketch, Wilted Violet, and Picked Raspberry Distress Oxide inks. And now I've sped up the editing here. It didn't take very long regardless, but I did speed this up. I don't color this quickly. Sometimes I wish I could, but with this it was just an enjoyable process. But I move a little bit quickly in real life regardless. Because once I add, the water with the clean water brush, I want to add, the color before everything has a chance to start drying. I find sometimes things dry rather quickly on me. And then one of the benefits of having all of these tails heat embossed is I can immediately go back and start adding more intense color to each of the tails without worrying that, things are going to bleed into each other and make a mess, because that raised heat embossing will keep everything contained. So I just use the exact same colors, and this time I'm just picking up the color directly with my water brush. I'm not adding any extra water or anything like that, and painting on another layer, and that gives it that more intense color. So went along, filled all those in, and then I still had a ton of ink, you know, on my mat here, and I didn't want to waste it. So what I ended up doing was just using just a little size 2 paintbrush and picking up the color with the wet paintbrush and tapping it against my finger and adding splatter. And for the most part, I was able to kind of control the splatter in a fairly narrow-ish line. So I could add splatter in the same order as I've painted it on the background. So going like red, orange, yellow to green, blue, purple, pink. Now, I've also mentioned in videos, for whatever reason, when I do splatter with Distress Oxide inks, they are, I don't know what word to give them. They can be tricky when it's splatter. I think it's because of the like pigment nature of them. The splatter will look like it's dry, but it's not. Don't believe that. I literally let this sit and dry. I went and cleaned, you know, I was cleaning my bathroom and cleaning the kitchen, etc. I let this sit and dry for way longer than I normally would. I find any other splatter, usually you can tell when it's dry. With this, it just, you'll think it's dry and it will still smear. So heat set it, let it dry overnight really is probably the best effort. I let it dry for a while. It was still actually a little wet. I smeared a couple little tiny spots, but nothing like I usually do. So make sure it's completely dry. And once it is, I can now finish the rest of my card. I'm using sentiments from the Mermaid song stamp set. I thought it was rather fitting with this sort of like all these images. You are fantastic. So I used my travel stamp platform and Versafine Onyx black ink to stamp this, and I stamped it a couple times. I really wanted the sentiment to be very black and intense against all this like rainbow color. And then while I had my platform out, I pulled out my card base, which was heavyweight white cardstock, and another sentiment from that Mermaid song stamp set. And I'm going to stamp that as well with that Versafine Onyx black ink. And then once that's stamped, I'm going to take that mermaid image from the Swimming By set, and I'm just going to ink up the tail with all those same Distress Oxide inks that I used to paint the front of the card. This time I'm just going to stamp those tails with those inks on the inside of the card. So it didn't take very long because I'm just going to ink up the tail with each of those inks. Then I just wipe off the stamp before inking it up with the next ink, and then I'm just stamping them all along the bottom of the card. You could do a card front with this too instead of doing the watercoloring. I really liked how this turned out in the end. I was like, oh, this was really nice, and just, again, no masking or anything like that, and it just looks good. So I was like, oh, I could have made like 2 cards, one doing the watercoloring and one doing the stamping, but I always like to finish the inside of the cards, so I was happy with it regardless. But once everything is stamped, I use score tape to adhere this watercolored card front to my card base. It had warped a little bit with the heat embossing and the watercoloring, not a lot, but enough that I wanted to use something really strong. So I have 1/2 inch score tape here, covered the back of that, and then I'm going to adhere that to my card base. And then once that is adhered, I couldn't resist adding a little bit of bling, but nothing too blingy, because there's, you know, a lot going on with color and the splatter and everything. So I just have some sparkling clear jewels here, and I kind of sprinkled those fairly liberally around my card. And I'm adhering those into place with just my multi-medium matte adhesive, just picking up the jewels with my jewel picker, and then pressing those into the adhesive, and that's going to finish off my card. So as always, there will be a link below the video to my blog post. There'll be links to all the supplies used, so you can check that out below if you're interested. Thank you all so much for watching and subscribing and thumbs upping my videos. I really appreciate it, and I will see you all very soon in the next one. Bye!